Everyone thinks they already know why Peyton Brown refused to walk away from his father, but what if the truth has been hiding in plain sight all along? Stay with me, because one overlooked detail could completely change the way you see this family forever. Have you ever wondered what happens when an entire family seems to move in one direction, but one person refuses to follow no matter how much criticism comes their way? At first glance, the answer seems obvious, yet the deeper you look, the more complicated everything becomes, because sometimes the loudest story is not the most complete one, and sometimes the person standing alone is carrying a truth that everyone else has chosen to overlook. That is exactly why today's story is far more surprising than it first appears. Almost everyone has heard about the growing distance between Kody Brown and many of his children. The headlines, the discussions, and countless online conversations have created a picture that feels settled, almost unquestionable, yet hidden inside that familiar narrative is one son whose actions continue to confuse viewers and spark endless debate. Peyton Brown has repeatedly chosen a path that almost nobody expected, and every time he speaks, the reaction grows stronger. Some believe he is protecting someone who does not deserve it. Others believe he is simply refusing to abandon his father when nearly everyone else already has. But before deciding which side is right, there is another question that deserves far more attention. What if the biggest mystery is not Kody at all? What if the real mystery is Peyton himself? And before we reach the end of the story, you may discover that the answer is nothing like what you expected, because the closer we examine his decisions, the more another possibility quietly begins to emerge, one that changes the way this entire family conflict can be understood. That possibility may not excuse every mistake made inside the family, but it does force us to question whether one single perspective can ever explain years of complicated relationships, especially inside a family that has lived so much of its life in front of millions of viewers. Every conversation, every disagreement, and every emotional moment has been examined by people who only witnessed carefully selected pieces of a much larger reality. Cameras capture scenes, but they never capture every memory, every private conversation, or every quiet act of kindness that happens when nobody else is watching. That alone creates a mystery worth exploring, because public opinion often fills those missing spaces with assumptions, and assumptions can slowly become accepted as unquestioned facts. Peyton appears to understand this better than most, and whether people agree with him or not, he continues speaking as though he has experienced something entirely different from what the audience believes. That raises a fascinating possibility. What if two completely different realities can exist inside the same family at the same time? Imagine growing up with siblings who remember the same father in completely different ways. One remembers encouragement, another remembers disappointment. One remembers laughter, another remembers distance. None of them are necessarily inventing their experiences, they are simply remembering different pieces of the same person. Families rarely create identical memories, because every relationship develops its own unique story, shaped by age, timing, personality, and countless moments that nobody else ever sees. This is where Peyton begins separating himself from the larger narrative. Instead of joining the growing criticism, he consistently suggests that his own experiences lead him somewhere else. That decision has not been easy. In fact, it has made him one of the most controversial figures connected to the Brown family, because standing against popular opinion almost always comes with consequences. Every statement is questioned, every motive is analyzed, every word becomes another reason for strangers to decide who he. As the story moves deeper, another layer begins to appear, and this is where everything becomes even more difficult to explain, because the biggest conflicts inside families are rarely created by a single moment. They grow quietly over years through different expectations, different personalities, and different memories, until eventually everyone believes they are holding the complete truth. Yet no matter how convinced someone becomes, another family member often remembers the very same years through an entirely different lens. That seems to be exactly where Peyton now finds himself, standing in a place where his own experiences refuse to match the version that has become accepted by so many others. Imagine carrying memories that feel completely real while constantly being told those memories must somehow be incomplete or mistaken. That creates an emotional pressure few people ever experience, because it forces someone to question not only their opinions, but also the very foundation of their Childhood, every interview, every discussion, and every public reaction places Peyton in that uncomfortable position where he must either remain silent or continue defending experiences that shaped the person he became. Silence might protect him from criticism, but it would also mean abandoning a version of his own life that still feels genuine, and perhaps that explains why he continues speaking even when doing so brings very little support instead of choosing the easier path he repeatedly accepts. The difficult one, and that decision reveals something important about his character. Whether people agree with him or not, it suggests he values personal conviction more than public approval. Yet this is where the story takes another unexpected turn, because loyalty often carries a hidden cost that outsiders rarely notice. Every time Peyton publicly supports his father, another invisible wall may quietly grow between him and siblings who experience the family very differently. Those emotional distances can beck. That role demands resilience, because it often satisfies nobody. The parent may still face criticism, while siblings may struggle to understand the continued loyalty, leaving the loyal child isolated somewhere between both sides, trying to preserve a relationship without completely denying anyone else's pain. It is a lonely position, and perhaps that loneliness explains more than any public statement ever could. Yet before reaching a final conclusion, another question deserves careful consideration. What if years from now, entirely new information changes the way this family history is understood? What if private conversations, forgotten memories, or unseen moments eventually reveal connections that audiences never imagined? Suddenly, many of today's confident assumptions could appear incomplete. That possibility should encourage humility, because family stories are almost never finished while the people involved are still living them. Every passing year creates new understanding, new forgiveness, and sometimes entirely new conflicts that reshape everything believed before. For now, Peyton remains one of the most debated figures in this ongoing story, not because he speaks the loudest, but because he speaks differently. In a world where nearly everyone seems comfortable following the same direction, he continues walking another path, and whether that path eventually proves wise, mistaken, or somewhere in between remains one of the biggest unanswered questions of all. The truth may still be waiting beyond the next chapter, and that possibility alone is enough to keep people watching, because sometimes the most important answers only appear after every assumption has already been challenged. And what happens when those answers finally arrive may transform this entire story in ways that nobody sees coming. Today, the more this story unfolds, the harder it becomes to place anyone into simple categories, because every new perspective reveals another hidden layer that was impossible to see before. What once sap rarely offer certainty. Instead, they leave behind unanswered questions, unfinished conversations, and memories that refuse to fit neatly together. Peyton seems to be living inside that uncertainty every single day, trying to balance love, loyalty, disappointment, and hope while the world continues demanding simple answers. But perhaps the biggest surprise is not that he defends his father. Perhaps the biggest surprise is that his willingness to do so forces everyone else to examine their own assumptions. Because every family contains different versions of the same story. One child remembers encouragement, another remembers absence, one remembers laughter, another remembers heartbreak, and all of those memories can exist at the same time without canceling one another. That possibility changes everything, because it reminds us that no single person can completely describe an entire family, no matter how confident they may sound. As years continue passing, the Brown family keeps changing. Relationships evolve, new conversations happen, old wounds slowly heal while others remain difficult to overcome. And throughout all those changes, Peyton continues representing something many viewers overlook: the complicated reality of unconditional family loyalty. Some people see strength in that, others see denial. Yet both interpretations acknowledge the same fact: his position has never been the easy one. Remaining loyal during public controversy often requires sacrificing popularity, comfort, and sometimes even closeness with other family members. That emotional burden rarely receives attention, because most conversations focus only on who is right and who is wrong, instead of asking what it feels like to carry that responsibility every single day. Imagine watching people criticize someone you still care about, while knowing that defending them will immediately bring criticism toward you as well. That emotional conflict has no perfect solution, because silence can feel like betrayal, while speaking can create even Gria. If you thought this story was overthink again, because the biggest revelation may still be waiting, and what happens next could change everything we thought we knew about the Brown family. So make sure you subscribe because you will not want to miss what comes next.